Wonwoo had only been gone for less than a day. Jun's mind was empty. He stayed in bed all day. When he was awake, he checked his phone. When he was sleepy, he fell into a daze and repeated this over and over again. He only had one meal. When he was cleaning up the dishes, he broke a bowl without any energy. Mingho snatched his rubber gloves and rushed him out, saying, "You've been staying in the dormitory all day. Go out and get some fresh air." He said he was taking a walk, but in fact he just ran to another dormitory without even leaving the unit. When he entered the room, he ran into Mingyu changing shoes at the entrance, as if he was going to exercise. Jun rubbed his eyes and mumbled, "Mingho is washing dishes," and then went into Wonwoo's room. Staring at the electronic screen for too long makes my eyes itchy. Normally Wonwoo can sit in front of the computer all day. I don't know how he can stand it. The room was originally shared with Sungchul, but later Sungchul moved to the living room to sleep in order to make room for the computer, which indirectly made it easier for Jun to come and see Wonwoo. But Jun never entered the room when Wonwoo was not there. Because of the battle trip, Wonwoo left for the airport early in the morning with Sungchul and Jonghan. Usually, he would say hello to Jun before going on a long trip, give him a kiss or hug him. This ritual has become a habit. But Wonwoo didn't come this morning, probably because it was too early and he didn't want to disturb his rest. When Jun woke up, he had already boarded the plane, and the phone was turned off when he called. If I had known, I would have gone to sleep with him last night. Jun was in a bad mood the whole day. With a click, the lights in the room came on. Wonwoo didn't have the habit of folding his quilt. His pajamas and quilts were piled at the head of the bed. The curtains were drawn tightly, and the room, which had not been ventilated all day, was filled with a faint smell of rotten mold. He was probably still playing games before he left. There was a half-finished bag of potato chips on the table. It was bought by Jun, and later, because he didn't like the flavor, he gave him the remaining bags. When Jun first heard that they were going to Yogyakarta, Indonesia, he was eating chips of this flavor and taught Wonwoo the Chinese pronunciation of Yogyakarta. It's a sound that even Chinese people can't pronounce well. "Hey, well, you have to roll up your tongue." The eyes behind the lenses were confused. But Jun found it interesting. Mingyu said that if you go as far as possible, it will be easier to win. Jun didn't know how to respond for a moment, so he put down the potato chips in his hand, hugged Wonwoo and buried his head in the crook of his neck. "What's wrong?" His voice resonated in his chest, sounding softer than usual. "This tastes too salty, well, can you help me eat it?" "Good." He always spoke briefly, but his words were reassuring. Jun stood up, put his hands on Wonwoo's shoulders, and laughed again. "Don't think of this as work, have fun." Wonwoo wiped the potato chip crumbs from the corner of his mouth and replied briefly, "Okay." But Jun doesn't think Mingyu is cute at all. Does Wonwoo feel that way? The half bag of potato chips became soft due to moisture. After eating one piece, Jun felt that it was too salty. He folded the seal several times and put it back. Next to it was a game controller that had not been put away yet. The bright red buttons looked like crystal clear gummy candies. The salty taste of the potato chips left a thirsty feeling at the bottom of his tongue, and Jun wanted to eat some candy. Then he dived into Wonwoo's blanket. It's Jun's favorite flavor. Wonwoo's flavor. He recognized Wonwoo's scent. Jun also found it strange. Everyone was using the same laundry detergent, so why was he the only one who was so special? He once tried to describe this smell to Mingho, but he still couldn't understand after all his gesticulations. He frowned awkwardly. Is it because it smells so good? It can't be called a fragrance, but rather overbearing, and yet it seems to be covered with soft down, coming gently and gently, with a sense of security hidden in the complexity, rolling over Jun's nostrils with an inexplicable warmth. Even after a workout, the sweat smells good. Sticky and shrouded in moisture, the temperature of the brainless body could actually rise a few degrees. Not like the one left on the bedding, which was cold. He seemed to be missing Wonwoo a little. Would Wonwoo be like this? When he was on a trip to China and couldn't see each other for several days, would he think of him like he did now when he heard the hum of the washing machine and hung up the unwashed clothes before leaving? Jun was disappointed to find that the two of them had been together for too long, and all the intimate contact was more like a habit than a hobby, such as hugging before going on a long trip and going to Wanwa's room one night a week, so June couldn't remember how long it had been since they last kissed passionately in the corridor. Were they intimate enough? They didn't become more dependent on each other because of the accumulation of time. Even when he missed her, June would search the internet for the time difference between Japan and Yogyakarta instead of calling her. Wanwa too. When I was traveling in China, we rarely talked on the phone. Even though we texted each other every day, it was just daily greetings like, "Eat well." June's cheek became itchy because of the pressure left by the zipper of the quilt. He raised his hand to rub it. Just then, a dialogue box from Wanwa popped up on his phone and June's eyelids twitched. "We have arrived safely. Look, it's like this again. It's the temperature left on the quilt. Low temperature love. Instead, it's cold. Got it? Have a good rest, happy face. It turns out that I am almost the same." The screen went off. June got out of bed, tidied up his messy hair, and walked to the door. The room went dark again. The mercury vapor in the fluorescent tube that had just been turned off still emitted sporadic fluorescence, but it soon went out completely. Everything about Wanwa in the room was shrouded in darkness, and his eyes, which had adapted to the bright light, could not catch anything. Mingho's newly released solo song was playing in his headphones. His brisk whistles were like waves drowning out the noise. His voice was as beautiful and neat as his figure, without too much decoration. The lyrics were in Chinese, which Mingyu couldn't understand, and the way of pronouncing the words was unfamiliar to him. When he was writing this song, he asked Mingyu about the technique of writing lyrics for rap. Mingyu was a little surprised and just scratched the back of his head and replied, "Just write down what you want to say." Mingyu stopped, the heat from the long run slowly rising from his body, climbing up to the back of his neck and the tips of his ears. He leaned over and supported his knees with both hands, hot blood rushed to his temples, his breathing became disordered, and a deep energy burst out from his beating heart, burning fiercely. "One day my dreams will come true. Dreams come true." Mingyu could understand this sentence. It was also a topic they had talked about too many times, so many times that they could no longer come up with anything new. Even so, they were excited countless times at night by the flames sketched with just a few strokes, and felt that they would be able to conquer everything when the daybreak came. Little did they know that language is a kind of bewitching intelligence, and when they really passed through the fog, all they arrived at was a lonely island shrouded in darkness, and there was still a sea to cross, and they didn't know where the shore was. It's purely a matter of shedding blood. So what about liking him? Is it pure enough? Will it have an end? Where is the shore? The song ends. The whistle played the same last note as at the beginning, unhurriedly, just like the day after he kissed Mingho. He covered his mouth with the back of his hand and spoke in a slow tone. "Mingyu, even in the dormitory, you should still be careful." Before Mingyu could answer, Woozy slapped him on the back. He must have wanted to get some water in the living room, but he happened to see the two of them having a passionate time. "That's right, kid. No wonder Mingho is shy." It was the same when we were recording the other day. Mingho buried his head and grabbed his sleeve. He had just had his hair cut, revealing a snow-white neck. "Why did you suddenly ask Woozy about the cantaloupe?" It made everyone a little embarrassed. Mingyu responded with a hum and also lowered his head to rub his face against his neck, wanting to kiss him gently. But Mingho pushed her away with brute force. "Did you listen to me?" Mingho's hands were still on his shoulders, his head was still buried low, and his shoulders were stubbornly hunched. Mingyu didn't expect to make the other party angry. He stood there for a long time and could only utter, "I'm sorry." So he doesn't like himself like this? Mingyu straightened up. The sudden movement made his eyes go dark for a moment. The song looped to the beginning again. The whistle and guitar accompaniment wrapped up his thoughts mixed with sharp thorns. He steadied his center of gravity, took another step and ran back. Wanwa said more than once that he was a fool who didn't know how to push and pull. When he fell in love, he just jumped on her and wanted to overdraw all his passion reserves. But people should be careful about their relationship. The tighter you hold a handful of water in your hand, the faster it will leak. Too much love will also lead to weightlessness. Mingyu didn't take it seriously at the time and said, "Brother, stop it. Everyone can be reasonable. So, does June like you to play push and pull with him?" The result, of course, was that his neck was strangled by the other person's arm. But now it seems to make sense. Mingho got angry with him for this more than once. Previously, when Lee Kan mentioned the phone case Mingho picked for him in a live broadcast, Mingyu directly put on a bad face in front of the camera. Afterwards, Mingho and him were in a cold war for several days. You are not like you at all, it's okay that you are unprofessional, but why are you angry with your brother? Mingyu was also puzzled. The more he liked someone, the more he wanted to possess them. Was he the only one like this? He has always been a straightforward person and can't stand the hesitation and pushing and shoving. He thought that if he was honest and sincere, he could get the same warmth in return, but after several trials and errors, he failed. If love is given too much, it will become dull and lifeless. In addition to being inseparable, it needs to be close yet distant. The ambiguity is the part that Mingyu has never been able to grasp. As usual, he arrived at Mingho's dormitory door first. He was sweating after exercise and needed to go back to take a shower immediately, but he couldn't move. Although he raised his hands several times to knock on the door, he finally gave up. He thought of Mingho's raised shoulders that day. Is it possible that his gaze has become a heavy burden? The inner demon is growing and showing its fangs and claws. How to do the push and pull that Wanwu mentioned. Mingyu couldn't find the balance and he was so frustrated. On Wanwu's last night in Yogyakarta, June received a call from him. He called before going to bed, and because of the 2-hour time difference, it was already early in the morning when June received the call. Wanwu may have had a few drinks, so he spoke slower than usual, with the syllables sticking together like boiled red beans, soft and gentle. June, do you like mountains or the sea? Sungkwan was already asleep. June got out of bed quietly, holding his phone, and left the room. Unexpectedly, Mingho was also in the living room. When he saw that June was on the phone, he just smiled at him knowingly. June? The mountains? His voice was slightly sober, perhaps because it was an unexpected answer. Why? Because I can see the sea often, but only in Shenzhen can I see a lot of mountains, so I miss it. Yes, June loves his hometown very much. That's a pity. The sea I saw with Jonghan and the others today was really beautiful. June didn't reply, but smiled softly, even though Wanwu couldn't see it. It's really beautiful, and the pictures can't capture its beauty. I wish June could see it too. When he was a trainee, June once went to the beach alone. All the members were going to school that day, leaving him alone in the dormitory. He didn't know where he got the courage from, but he skipped the afternoon language class and bought himself a ticket to the beach for the first time in his still awkward Korean. It was because of the first words Wanwu said to him. So June is also a kid from the seaside? June, can I call him that? The boy's hair was very long at that time, messily tied up his eyelashes. He raised his hand to push aside the soft hair ends, and his eyes were revealed. It has the temperature that June likes. The chaotic air in the bus was made even more nauseating by the bumpy ride, and when the salty sea breeze wrapped in fine rain blew towards him, he felt so sad that he wanted to cry. My hometown is just across the street. At an age when emotions are already fragile, he arrived in a foreign land alone, with a dozen big boys crowded in one dormitory. During the many sleepless nights, he could hear the rustling sound of fabrics rubbing against each other, the inaudible sighs and the desperately suppressed cries. But no one spoke. When the sun rose, they would be full of energy again. But June misses home very much. We will succeed. To this day, June still feels that the coolest thing he did during his adolescence was shouting those words towards Shenzhen without shedding tears. When we succeed, let's go back to Shenzhen with June, he said later when he told Wanwu about it. There was a burst of noise from the other end of the line, and then Sungchul's voice changed. Is this June? Hey, Wanwu is a little drunk. Did calling you so late at night disturb your rest? June hurriedly said it was okay, and the other party reminded him to go to bed early and hung up the phone without switching to Wanwu. What? It was not even a few words. June pouted in dissatisfaction. The sleepiness he had accumulated before was completely dispelled by this mindless phone call. He put away his phone, sighed, sat cross-legged on the sofa, and finally turned to ask Mingho, who had been silent the whole time, so why are you here again? Why can't you sleep? He was flipping through the March issue of Dazed magazine on the sofa. Because it contained an interview with Mingyu, the members bought a copy each to show their support, and they piled them up into a small pile in the dormitory. Once when everyone was eating instant noodles together, he took a copy and used it as a pot mat, and has since left it in the living room. He just turned to the page of Mingyu's interview and stopped, saying sullenly, "Mingyu seems angry." June exaggeratedly made a vomiting expression and loosely grabbed Mingho's neck and shook him back and forth. "You'd better save your breath. Look at how he sticks to you all day long, as if he's afraid that others don't know that you two are in a relationship." Mingho laughed when he was shaken and reached out to grab June's collar to fight back, but he heard the other party stop teasing and said seriously, "It's different from Wanwo." June said he didn't understand whether he and Wanwo were in love with each other. He had liked him since he was a trainee. He liked his voice getting deeper as it changed, he liked him giving him Korean prompts in his ear, he liked standing behind him during dance practice and looking at his neck soaked with sweat. His eyes would uncontrollably look for him, and sometimes he would be discovered. He would panic at first, but later he would smile at him more often and carefully hide his feelings in a jar called friendship, until one day Wanwo kissed him behind the door of the practice room. Oh, it turns out this jar is transparent. June didn't refuse, and they got together. I can't even remember whether Wanwo said, "I like," to him. But he didn't know when he started to become greedy. In the past, Wanwo would be happy all day if she looked at him. But now, he wanted to hug after holding hands, and kiss after hugging. The speed of being satisfied could not catch up with the unbridled desire. He felt that he must like Wanwo more than Wanwo likes him, otherwise he would not be the only one in danger in this push and pull. They fell in love at a poor yet passionate age. Their lives were so small that there were only a few inches of night sky leaking through the dormitory window and a few miles of worldly affairs between the company and the practice room. They warmed each other and fantasized about the future, and the romance they picked always carried the musty smell of a semi-basement. Later, the smell of love turned into the greasy fragrance of powder, hairspray, and lip gloss. Wanwo was still his impeccable lover, but June would miss the corrupt and musty smell before his debut. It seems that as the world gets bigger, love gets smaller. He suddenly thought of a sentence Mingho read to him when they were reading a book. "The world of adults is like colorful lights wrapped around ruins, which are beautiful only when viewed from a distance." Maybe love too. Once you get it and hold it in your hands, it becomes less beautiful. He was increasingly confused about his love for Wanwo. "So Mingyu is really good." June picked up the magazine in Mingho's hand and read it carefully. "He is someone who can give you a sense of security. Unlike Wanwo, he has a down-to-earth warmth. I really like interacting with people. I'm the type who takes the initiative to approach others." June spread the magazine between them, pointed at the sentence, and read it out loud, imitating Mingyu's tone. "Wow, this is exactly Mingyu, the kind who is very likable." June said as he lightly twisted the footer a few times, the hardness of the coated paper leaving a dull pain on his fingertips. "He was like this when I first met him, humorous and a little naughty, but very friendly." "I know." Mingho curled up his legs, clasped his arms around them, and rested his chin on his knees. Of course he knew that Mingyu was a friendly and humorous person, which was why everyone liked him, but he hated it most when people said that about him. There are more good things about him than just these two. So Mingho would be so conceited that he would think, "What do you know about him? I understand him too well." He smiles at everything and is a clingy kid who loves physical contact. When he is teased, he will at most put on an unhappy look. Some fans call this his fool charm, but Mingho knows that he is actually thoughtful and considerate, and knows how to maintain a comfortable distance, so he is always gentle to get along with. No one is born popular. Mingyu is actually a mature and solid person. How could he not like him? It's just that his emotions are too open. Mingho sometimes can't stand it, and sometimes can't stand his warm attitude towards everyone. Swinging between boiling hot and superficial warmth, sweating but not completely, the miasma is suffocated in the heart and permeates the sky, and finally it is an emotional heatstroke. "Did you listen to me?" He never thought that Mingyu actually listened to him and didn't come to see him for several days. In the end, he was the first one to regret it. Mingho also wanted to be as frank as Mingyu, but what he said only made the other party indulge him blindly. It was as if he was taking advantage of the other party's preferences and throwing tantrums, and even he felt that he was being willful. I shouldn't have lost my temper with him that day. He was just like that. I should have thought of it. Mingho reached out and poked Mingyu's face in the magazine, his neck, the mole on the side of his face, his lips, nose, and eyes. Mingho liked his eyes the most. Mingyu likes to close his eyes when kissing him, but Mingho is different. He always keeps his eyes open to peek at his long and dense eyelashes, which are infinitely magnified in front of his eyes, trembling slightly with the exchange of breathing, and his brows will be seriously furrowed. Our Mingho really likes him. June got up and ruffled Mingho's hair. Don't think too much. Go to bed early. Mingho put away the magazine, thought for a long time and finally took out his mobile phone. He quickly wrote a sentence, "Good night," and sent it to Mingyu. The message, unread, was still displayed next to the dialog box. He must have fallen asleep. Mingyu felt like he couldn't hold it anymore. Wanwa had told him that he should be careful about how to date, and he realized that he might be too clingy. But after they had distanced themselves from each other, Mingyu became even more dependent on Mingho. Besides, the person who gave him advice is now in trouble himself. After Wanwa came back from Yogyakarta, Mingyu only met June once in the dormitory. He came out of Wanwa's room in the morning with a bad look on his face. But he didn't have time to care whether the two of them were reunited after a short separation. Wanwa had gone too far in some things. He just wanted to know why Mingho always sent him messages in the early morning, and they only had 2 words, "Good night." The worst thing is that he always sees it in the morning, so he misses the opportunity to reply and doesn't know how to care. Is he unable to sleep? What does good night mean? Is he hinting at me? Will he dislike it if I go to see him at night? Mingyu was almost obsessive about whether Mingho had a good rest. It's because of the moment when I was hit by the rough stone of love. At that time, Mingyu was thinking all day about how to finish his practice tasks quickly so that he could go to the convenience store at mealtime to have a bite of hot instant rice and listen to the music playing lively on the TV above his head. Take a bite of oden and imagine it being cut into countless small pieces of red, green, and blue, and then vividly pieced together on screens of all sizes. That day, Mingyu was also counting on his fingers at the convenience store to see if the remaining pocket money was enough to add an extra sausage to his ramen. When he was waiting in line to pay, he realized that he had left his wallet in the practice room. It was already very late when he turned back. He didn't expect that there was still a light on in the practice room. He pushed the door open and saw the boy who had just been there a few days ago lying in the middle of the floor resting. Mingyu had only seen him a few times. A boy from China, a little shy, not good at speaking Korean, always hiding behind June. When he first greeted him, his hat was pulled down low, and Mingyu could only see his thin jawline and his lips pursed into a straight line with no clear emotion. Then he saw his eyes for the first time. He was still lying there gasping for breath, and was surprised when someone came in. When he saw Mingyu, he wanted to sit up, but failed because he was too tired. In the end, he could only look at him apologetically. It was especially dark in the evening when the cold light could not reach the room. His eyes seemed to be the only source of light in the room, flickering and urgently bright under the spotlight as he had seen countless times on TV. Mingyu found his wallet and tried to speak to ease the embarrassment. "Don't tire yourself out." He clearly felt the light in the boy's eyes flicker a few times. There was silence for a long time. Mingyu heard the answer. The voice was a little childish, which was in stark contrast to his appearance. "How can you sleep if you're not tired?" The stiff pronunciation just brought out a hint of stubbornness, but the stumbling made Mingyu dizzy. After that, Mingyu would always think of him before going to bed, wondering if he would be unable to sleep. Later, Mingyu stayed in the practice room for longer and longer periods of time, which the other trainees thought was abnormal. Sungchul even teased him at the time, "Aren't you Cinderella? Don't you have to worry about your parents' curfew?" His nose felt hot from the question and he didn't answer, but just smiled guiltily. "If I stay until the end, I can be alone with Mingho for a while." At that time, everyone praised him for his seriousness in physical training. In fact, Mingyu knew that he was exhausted and almost collapsed. The next day, his muscles were sore that he even trembled when holding chopsticks. He just waited for Mingho to ask him, "Are you not going home yet?" Then he could ask him logically, "Did you have a good rest yesterday?" At first Mingho just said, or vaguely replied, "Not bad." But later when they got to know each other well, he was able to chat with Mingyu, until one day he replied, "It would be nice if I could drink. I heard that alcohol can improve sleep quality." Mingyu was stunned for a few seconds, then I know. Waiting for the day of debut, waiting for the day when Mingho becomes an adult and can drink, Mingyu doesn't know which day he is looking forward to more. They debuted in the spring and Mingho became an adult in the winter of that year. On Mingho's birthday, they had just debuted for half a year and lived in one dormitory with 13 people. They waited until midnight and gathered around Mingho to wish him a happy coming of age, and stayed up very late. Mingyu had a rare sleepless night. After failing to fall asleep, he simply got up and went out, taking his ID card to the convenience store to buy some wine. He didn't know why he particularly wanted to do this at that moment. Mingyu still thinks back on this incident and feels like he has become the protagonist of the world. The convenience store happened to be playing Long Live, and he felt the reality of his debut for the first time. He was so surprised that he wanted to shout "Long Live" on the street. When he returned to the dormitory with a glass of red wine in his arms, he found that Mingho was also not asleep, sitting in the living room staring out the window in a daze. When he saw Mingyu, Mingho didn't ask anything, but just said, "It would be nice if there was wine." The timing was all perfect. Mingyu laughed and shook the bottle in his hand. They said that the red wine in the convenience store is actually very delicious. Later, they searched through all the boxes and only found paper cups. They sat in the living room in the early morning, and the members' steady breathing as they slept could be heard from the inner room. They talked about everything in their voices that only the other party could hear, and laughed softly when they heard Sukmin mumbling in his sleep. There is no crisp sound when paper cups clink together, but when they talk about dreams, it is a future that is visible yet unclear. All the timing was perfect, including the break in the conversation. When Mingho turned his head, Mingyu leaned over, and their lips touched. No one taught them to drink, no one taught them to love. Mingyu felt like an aircraft flying towards Mars, regardless of the consequences, just to hit it. The aroma of wine lingered where they were touching, and he instinctively explored his lips and tongue, swallowing each other's taste, wanting to find out a true heart. The window still let in only a few inches of the night sky, and the moon was there, shining for those who had not yet fallen asleep. Later, they grew up unstoppably, and the ambitious goals they set during their trainee period were achieved one by one. They began to afford more expensive red wine, moved to a more spacious dormitory, and no longer had to curl up on the bunk bed unable to stretch their bodies. Mingyu and Mingho became roommates and separated, but they never changed the habit of sharing a bed. Mingyu thought that with wine and him, Mingho would be able to rest well. But the way he pushed her away with brute force a few days ago was like swallowing a piece of hard candy by accident, which got stuck in his throat and made it difficult to breathe. It finally melted and then it hurt when the sugar was peeled off. Why did he start staying up late again? The more Mingyu thought about it, the more confused his mind became. Finally, he closed his eyes and made up a reason to send him a message. Wonwoo and his team's battle trip is about to start. Do you want to come down and watch the live broadcast together? Mingho responded very quickly. Okay, June and I will come down together. Mingyu felt a little flustered for some reason. He walked around the living room for a few times and finally remembered to turn on the TV. He called out to Wonwoo's room, "June will be coming down later." A few hurried footsteps were heard in the room, and then it became quiet. The door lock clicked, and Wonwoo pushed the door open with messy hair, walking slowly, as if he was not the owner of the footsteps just now. Wonwoo didn't know what was wrong with him. He thought about June all the time during the 2 days of the trip to Yogyakarta. Although he could not meet June for several days due to personal schedules, it was never as serious as this. Maybe it's because I see Sungchul and Jonghan being together all day, or maybe it's because I'm a stranger now, so I can empathize with June more easily. When I think back on many things that happened in the past, they have a different flavor. When he drinks charcoal coffee on Malioboro Street, he will think of June's weird snacks. He likes to drink caramel macchiato that is so sweet that it makes your teeth fall out. When he sees colorful clothes in the market, he thinks they will look good on June, as the bright colors always match his skin color. He wants to take pictures of the Zongbalang Tianking for June, but he has not learned how to use a camera to capture the sun rays. Finally, on the coast of Palantritis, he and Sungshul Jonghyun played until they were soaked. When the sun set, he began to miss June's soft lips madly. He stood on the shore, the pink and blue water interweaving to the sky, just like the sea of cheering lights that lit up the audience seats during concerts, making him squint his eyes, and all he could see was yesterday and today. A long time ago, June told him that he once skipped his language class, ran to the beach alone towards his hometown, and shouted, "I will succeed." A boy's solemn, stubborn, and urgent promise. My heart instantly softened into a puddle of water. He also wanted to try it. What should he shout? In the distance, Jonghan was still pushing Sungshul into the sea. The sounds of laughter were hidden in the waves, intermittent. I really want to say out loud that I miss you. He actually didn't know how he fell in love with June. When Mingyu first fell in love with Mingho, he ran over to ask him how he pursued June and why he liked him. Wonwoo was stunned for a long time, and finally just answered, "I fell in love with it naturally, and I don't know why. It's just that they always stayed together during their trainee period, and whenever they met and greeted each other, June would always smile at him sweetly. And when he realized it, he was laughing too. How could this happen? What is there to like?" Then it was out of control. Every time he saw him in a crowd, he would subconsciously look for him. Even if he had made the mistake, he couldn't stop looking at him. When he realized it, he found that no matter what crowd he was in, he would always be the first to find him. What surprised him most was that he would always meet June's eyes. It was that cute smile again. Will he be the same as me? Later, their relationship became closer and June would ask him questions about Korean that he didn't understand, and over time they began to talk about each other's future, saying what color they would dye their hair when they debuted together. Wonwoo looked at June's bright eyes but wondered if his mother criticized him when he dozed off on the set as a child. He understood that the young man from a foreign country who came here to pursue his dream would be more eager and desperate for success than him, but he was going crazy and he just wanted to know how to kiss him. When he dragged June behind the door of the practice room, he completely gave up his reason. Love is the autonomous concession of logic. How can emotions make sense of first come first served? He wanted to be the only special one. After the boy was kissed, his ears were red and his lips were wet. He didn't refuse or say anything, but he grabbed Wonwoo's hand with his shaking hands as if he was grabbing a life-saving straw. His fingertips were cold, like a frightened little animal. Wonwoo understood that June should be thinking about tomorrow, but he is a person who lives in today. The dream was shattered several times at night, but Wonwoo couldn't bear to let go. As long as June didn't say no, he planned to possess him selfishly like that, hoping that time might ease his possessiveness. He made the biggest concession within his ability and gave June the initiative. As long as he was willing, he would never refuse. As for the extra desire and love, he decided to digest it himself. But Wonwoo later found out that time is the best medicine and it's all a lie. Time has made the relationship give birth to something more than love. They have shared almost all of each other's lives, but Wonwoo wants even more than that. He even wants to know such insignificant questions as whether she likes mountains or the sea. When he was in high school, Wonwoo would never compete with other boys for the pork floss bread in the canteen. Pork floss bread was indeed more delicious, but the red bean paste one was also okay. So he never thought of himself as a domineering or competitive person. But June is different. Although he doesn't care whether the bread filling is red bean paste or meat floss, he cannot live without bread. June is this kind of person, and there is no other than him. If June were to say no now, he wouldn't have the confidence to let go. I really want to say out loud that I miss you. Wonwoo opened his mouth but ended up shouting nothing. I hide my love quietly in the wind, hoping that when the wind blows, I can tell it to you in a different time zone. On TV, the host asked, "Do we 17 like the sea or the mountains?" Wonwoo looked at himself on the screen and said without hesitation, "I like mountains." Did you hear that? We had agreed to watch the live show together, but after watching the beginning, June ran into Wonwoo's room with red ears. Wanwoo naturally followed him in immediately, and neither of them came out until the end of the show. After the credits ended and several commercials were played, Mingho finally stood up and prepared to leave. "Then I will first. I send you." Before Mingho could finish his words, Mingyu, who had jumped up from the sofa, grabbed his wrist. The atmosphere between the two of them had indeed become much more subtle. Mingyu, who used to like to put her arm around Mingho's shoulders, this time just followed him obediently. Even after entering his room, she looked like a helpless little wife. Mingho knew that Mingyu wanted to say something, so he sat on the bed and waited for his next words. "Mingho, have you taken a rest recently? Mingho, have you seen June?" Sungkwan, who opened the door and came in, looked at Mingyu, who was halfway through his words, and automatically muted himself. The three of them were frozen in place. The door was closed lovingly, and Sungkwan's voice was getting farther and farther away. "Oh, it's only been quiet for a few days. It started again here." Mingho noticed the embarrassment that flashed across Mingyu's eyes. He bit his lip and remained silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "Mingho, do you not like this? Then don't go." This time it was Mingho who grabbed Mingyu, and because he used too much force, Mingyu was also dragged and thrown onto the bed. The other party still had a confused expression, and it was obvious that he had not yet digested the current situation. "Will you accompany me and drink together?" Mingho, who had not suffered from insomnia for a long time, did not fall asleep the whole night after moving into this big dormitory. He also felt very strange, as he was a light sleeper and should like living alone. A room occupied by one person is not noisy, but it is too empty. He told himself that it was okay, he would get used to it soon. And he has Mingyu. He often lets Mingyu stay overnight here. Although Mingyu is not a good sleeper and sometimes snores because of being too tired from the journey, the incredible thing is that he can sleep soundly when he is with him. Later, June talked about returning to Korea to record a variety show at the concert, and his voice was a little choked up. "It's really reassuring to be with you all." They were all under a lot of pressure during that time. June even asked him when he was losing control of his emotions, "Where is home?" Mingho is not as emotional as June, but he also felt sad after hearing it and couldn't say anything to comfort him. "I always wanted to be independent, but when I really did it, I missed the days we spent together so much. I can face the world well enough by myself, but I just want someone to accompany me." It had been a long time since he and Mingyu drank convenience store red wine together. He installed a wine cabinet of his own in his room. On the night he flew back to the dormitory from China, he found Mingyu holding the bottle of wine that had been stored in the cabinet for a long time. He smiled brightly, and his two symmetrical canine teeth seemed to be acting coquettishly. "Can I open this bottle today?" It was Mingho who took the initiative to kiss him that night. On the plane back, June fell asleep while reading an online novel, and the screen just stopped on one sentence. "It's a great world. Welcome home." The wine glasses clinked together. "I'm back." Seeing that Mingyu didn't seem to reject him, Mingho reached out and hugged him. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have lost my temper with you that day." "How could that be?" He felt Mingyu hug him back, and his heart finally settled down. His voice became softer. "I went to the convenience store to buy some red wine. Can you drink with me? Should I use a paper cup?" Mingyu seemed to sigh. "Why don't you take a good rest recently?" Mingho buried his face in the fabric of Mingyu's clothes. He didn't understand what June meant by the special smell, but he seemed to understand why he said that day that Mingyu could give people a sense of security. Behind the soft fabric lies a solid warmth. "Thinking of you." June couldn't figure out what Wanwa meant. June watched the show for a while, but he didn't take it in. The opening speech was really beyond his expectation, and he clearly felt that Wanwa was looking at him when the words, "I like mountains," sounded on the TV. What does he mean? This was clearly not the case a few days ago. The result was that he became more and more uncomfortable sitting there, and acted faster than he thought and fled to Wanwa's room. He regretted it the next second. How stupid of him to not expect Wanwa to follow him. "June? What's wrong?" Wanwa's voice was getting closer and closer, and June had nowhere to escape. He turned his back to Wanwu, his eyes desperately searching the table for straws to complain about or change the subject. The half bag of chips had been eaten, and the game controller was no longer thrown on the table. Damn, when did Wanwu become so tidy? Then he saw an open notebook, densely packed with the Chinese characters that June is familiar with. The strokes were written hesitantly, as if one had no connection with the other. The pen was heavy and the ink was full, stiffly forming two words June. What is this? June turned his head. It just so happened that the emotion in Wanwu's eyes changed from panic to evasion. Nothing. He did that again. June wanted to kick him. Wanwu. June rarely uses his full name, and his voice loses focus in anxiety. What do you mean? What the hell is this? June can write my Korean name, right? Wanwu hesitated for a long time and finally spoke. So I also want to write June's Chinese name. But June's strokes are too complicated and I always can't write it well. Just, sometimes when you're not around, but I miss you so much. Then you should tell me. June interrupted him. On the night when they came back from Yogyakarta, when Wanwu hugged him and wanted to kiss him again, June suddenly turned his head away and said, no. This was the first time he rejected him. He had no other intentions, just wanted to test Kwon Yuan. As a result, the other party was stunned, said nothing, and hugged his hand tightly, saying, are you tired? Then go to sleep, good night. So June thought he didn't like it anymore. He thought. They always think too much of themselves, are too considerate of each other, and are suspicious of love. They use their own yardstick to measure each other and the world, so they draw a circle for themselves and restrain each other. I can teach you. June lowered his head, his ears burning. This is so stupid. This shouldn't happen. June is so nice. So, are you going to kiss me? June raised his head, trying to see every subtle change in Wanwu's emotions. He was so bad at expressing himself, and so sure of his feelings that could overcome everything, which made June feel anxious and powerless. But what if I'm good at expressing myself? That wouldn't be the Wanwu he liked after all. Without waiting for his answer, June hugged his neck and kissed him deeply, the same deep kiss they used to give in the corridor, the same deep kiss he had missed countless times when Wanwu was away, and the same deep kiss he owed Wanwu that night. As emotional as ever. As long as you still like him, never be cold to him. True love is friendship dipped in honey. I like you as a family, a friend, and a lover. I can be anyone to you as long as you want. At its root, all emotions are love. No one would have thought that being fascinated by a tree would lead to falling in love with a forest. June, when can we go to Shenzhen to see the mountains together? Just the two of us? Well, it's agreed we must go. Mingyu, how long are you going to stick to me? Why do you ask that? You obviously like it very much. Then don't let go now. An agreement without exact confirmation is actually charming, and love alone can bind the fragile trust, maybe tomorrow, maybe for a lifetime. They struggle and pull each other repeatedly, but finally hold each other tightly, just for that ambiguous place. I prefer not to ask how long or when it will take. I prefer to think about possibilities. Existence has its own reasons. Prefer all possibilities about love.